In this episode, we come to the most legendary part of the IMJIN War story. How Korean naval commander Yi Sun-shin, with only 13 ships, took on a massive Japanese navy at the Battle of Myeongnyang. Yi Sun-shin's courageous stand would be so astounding, so amazing, that even his enemy, the Japanese, would come to revere him. All that's coming up. Before we get going, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps to support this channel. Thanks. When we last checked in on Yi Sun-shin, he had just been reappointed as Korea's supreme naval commander and was setting out to muster what was left of the navy. What he discovers is that almost the entire fleet had been destroyed in the Battle of Chilchon Strait, doomed by Commander Won-kyun's frozen inaction. Almost all of Korea's top naval commanders are also dead. Only Gyeongsang Right Navy Commander Bae Sol remains, and Yi Sun-shin considers Bae useless, a coward for having fled the battle at Chilchon as soon as the fighting began. It is mainly due to Bae Sol's retreat, however, that anything at all is left of the Korean Navy. 12 ships. As Yi Sun-shin races about Chola, mustering his forces, he's also trying to restore some sort of order, for the province is in a panic. A proclamation issued by the Japanese has promised that they will soon be coming to inflict wholesale death and destruction. This has prompted local officials and army officers to desert their posts, leaving behind burned or abandoned warehouses full of weapons and stores. The commander of one garrison even pulls down the walls of his own fort so as not to anger the Japanese when they come. Yi Sun-shin, stunned and angered by all of this, puts a unit of monk soldiers to work burying weapons and brutally sets about restoring order, reprimanding officials he finds cowering in hiding, whipping officers for dereliction of duty, and severely punishing civilians for any crime. 2 men caught stealing cattle have their heads cut off and put on public display. On September 28, 1597, Yi Sun-shin arrived at Horyongpo on the southwestern corner of Korea to rendezvous with disgraced Gyeongsang commander Bae Sol and take command of what was left of the fleet. Bae was late arriving, and when he did, he had only 10 ships, not 12. The other 2 had somehow gone astray. Bae was then openly disrespectful to Yi by not attending the official ceremony where the royal decree appointing him to command was read out. Yi, outraged but unable to punish such a high-ranking officer directly, had one of Bae's officers tied down and beaten instead. Bae himself slunk away soon after that, claiming sickness. He would not serve in the Navy again. In the days that followed, 2 more ships arrived at Horyongpo under the command of newly appointed Chola Right Navy Commander Kim Ok-chu. They were in bad shape and had only skeleton crews, but they were better than nothing. With a 3rd ship Yi Sun-shin scrounges up from somewhere else. This brings the fleet to 13. That's it. At the beginning of October 1597, the entire Korean fleet amounted to just 13 ships and no more than 120 demoralized men. To make the most of this meager force, Yi Sun-shin is said to have turned his 13 vessels into kobukson turtle ships. In the desperately short time he had, these conversions would have been rough, the Koreans simply covering the open top deck of their panokson warships with timber roofs. Iron spikes may have been hammered into these roofs to discourage boarders and to hold the wet straw in place that the Koreans heaped on top of their kobukson to extinguish fire arrows. The result would not have been nearly as attractive as depicted in the 2014 Korean movie of the upcoming battle, Myeongnyang, also known in English as the Admiral Roaring Currents. Yi Sun-shin's actual navy would have been 13 pretty rough-looking ships. While he was getting his ships ready for action, Yi Sun-shin was preparing his men, stirring up their courage with rousing speeches and urging them to put aside their fear. He would quote from such Chinese military classics as the 4th century BC Wu Tzu Ping Fa, Master Wu's Art of War, where it says, quote, "If the soldiers are committed to fight to the death, they will live. Whereas if they seek to stay alive, they will die." The Chinese called a force of such men a death army. This is what Yi Sun-shin is trying to create. To stand against the Japanese, his men will have to be a death navy. The Japanese Navy, by this time, is approaching. It has assisted with the start of the invasion of Chola by ferrying men along the south coast and up the Somjim River to Namwon. Now it's beginning to probe further west. Its objective is the Yellow Sea. Hideyoshi's navy had been unable to reach the Yellow Sea in the first invasion. The Korean Navy had blocked them. It had been a crucial setback, a key reason why the first invasion had ground to a halt. This time, however, in the second invasion, there will be no Korean Navy standing in the way. The Japanese would be free to enter the Yellow Sea and sail up the west coast to assist with the conquest of Chola. Or so they thought. Yi Sun-shin, with just 13 ships, is planning to stop them. He knows he can't meet the Japanese in open water, as he did in his earlier victories. The odds are too great. Instead, he devises a plan to enlist the power of the sea to help him, specifically the power of tidal currents. These currents are nowhere stronger than in the channel between Jin Island and the mainland on the extreme southwestern tip of Korea. This channel is known as Myeongnyang Strait, and also as Uldolmok, the Roaring Channel or Screaming Channel, on account of the ferocity of its currents. In choosing to make his stand here, Yi Sun-shin is again following the Wu Tzu Ping Fa, Master Wu's Art of War. Thus it is said, for one to attack 10, nothing is better than a narrow defile. For 10 to attack 100, nothing is better than a deep ravine. For 1,000 to attack 10,000, nothing is better than a dangerous pass. Myeongnyang would be Yi Sun-shin's deep ravine, his dangerous pass. The Japanese Navy have reached Oranpo by the middle of October, within just a few hours' sail now of the Yellow Sea. All they have to do is pass through Myeongnyang Strait, and they will be there. They now know that a remnant of the Korean Navy remains under Yi Sun-shin, so they're cautious. They mass their forces at Oranpo until the harbor is crowded with more than 200 ships. Then, on October 26, they make their move. Yi Sun-shin waits in ambush with his 13 ships just beyond the north end of Myeongnyang Strait, out of sight around the headland. As the Japanese divide into groups and begin to advance down the strait, carried along by the current, all they can see is a line of specks in the distance, arrayed in the open water of the Yellow Sea. Is this the Korean Navy? Do the Koreans actually still have so many ships? It's in fact a line of fishing boats, placed there by Yi Sun-shin to create the illusion of a formidable battle line of warships. When the Japanese reach the north end of the strait, Sun-shin gives the signal to attack. The Korean ships, with Yi's flagship at the fore, charge at the Japanese with wild abandon, blasting holes in their hulls with their cannons, setting them alight with fire arrows, ramming them with their heavy prows. Japanese ships coming up behind soon join the battle until there are 130 enemy ships swarming around the desperate Koreans. The Koreans, however, have become that death navy. They're fighting like demons and holding their own. And then, the miracle. The sea itself comes to the aid of the Koreans, just as Sun-shin had planned. The tide, which had carried the Japanese along through the strait, begins to turn. Soon, the current is so strong that the Japanese can't hold their positions and are swept back, the Koreans now pursuing. When it's all over, 31 Japanese ships have been destroyed, and the Korean Navy, it's intact. Sun-shin and his 13 warships, his death navy, has stood against 130 and won. The defeat of the Japanese Navy in the Battle of Myeongnyang, October 26, 1597, came 10 days after the Japanese army reached its northernmost point of advance and ran into the Chinese army at Chilchon. As the Japanese army began to withdraw back south in November, the Japanese Navy, denied entry to the Yellow Sea, began to pull back as well. The IMJIN War was now about to enter its final standoff. A standoff between the Japanese in their string of forts in the south, the Koreans, now regrouping, and the Chinese, who were sending a massive army to Korea, and this time a navy, to drive the Japanese out. Sun-shin's victory at Myeongnyang, won against impossible odds, would raise him to almost godlike status. And not just among the Koreans. No one would have a greater reverence for Korea's supreme naval commander than Yi's own enemy, the Japanese. During the Meiji era, officers in Japan's newly created modern navy would hold up Sun-shin as a role model, the embodiment of Bushido spirit, the way of the warrior, as practiced at sea. In the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, after winning a tremendous naval battle against the Russians, Admiral Togo would be feted at a banquet with comparisons to Britain's Lord Nelson and to Sun-shin. Togo would brush this compliment aside. "It may be proper to compare me to Nelson," he said, "but not with Sun-shin. He is too great to be compared to anyone."